means I'm awake. So an awakening. And we said Lesata is below, La'ela is above. So an awakening from below, as I was saying, a bid for connection from below, and an awakening from above, a bid for connection from above. Let's bring a practical example before we actually go in. What's a practical example of this Israsita Lesata, of an awakening from below? Davening. That's a great one. And that's really what this mimer is saying, that whole working on our animal soul happens specifically in davening. So davening is hard work. You don't necessarily feel the inspiration. You wake up in the morning, you're like, I'm going to pray because God told me to pray and I need to get my animal soul on board, even though it's not interested. And it's usually a process of, and I've brought this down before, in the Zohar, it calls davening Shas Slasa, Shas Krava, a time of battle and a time of war. It's not easy. It's not smooth, the process of prayer in the morning. It's not like we usually think of meditation. Yes, although meditation is hard too.
Is that why Chassidim or Chabad Chassidim learn Chassidus before they daven to get their animal soul on board?
Yes. To get also that inspiration, that fuel, to be able to have a deeper experience in the davening, where it's not one where it's just focused on the battle, but where you can actually focus on the feelings of love and fear for Hashem, which is the goal of davening, to develop feelings of love and fear, but that they have to have been developed from our work, which again means that the love and fear will be more limited than love and fear that God gifted us, but it's more real. So absolutely. Chassidus before davening. It's interesting, I was speaking to Rabbi Kaufman about this. He's saying it's become this idea that the time for learning Chassidus is before davening. So like if you'll see a lot of schedules in seminaries and in yeshivas, the time where you're supposed to, where they put an emphasis on the Chassidic learning is before davening. So it's first thing in the morning, which in a way loses I really like what he was saying, it loses the point. The Chassidus, the idea of learning Chassidus before davening doesn't mean the time for learning Chassidus is in the morning. Because actually he says that it's brought that it's in the evening, that's the optimal time for learning Chassidus, which is super interesting because I've found that in the evening when I read through a mimer, usually one that I've learned before, but that there's something about it. You go to sleep with, there's something about it that's different. The idea of Chassidus in the morning is not that the time for learning the deepest concept of Chassidus is the moment you roll out of bed. It's the idea that before you daven, you want to be in the right headspace. You want to have, as you said, God and your animal soul inspired to a certain extent as well. Although the Chassidus in the morning is not the Israsita Lesata, the davening is the Israsita Lesata. As the Alter is going to clarify, that Torah learning, even though we're doing the Torah learning, is more of an Israsita Le'ela, because it's not as difficult and it's not as much of getting the animal soul on board. But it gives us the inspiration to do the hard work and davening of getting the animal soul on board. Did you get a haircut?
No, I'm just trying.
Looks very pretty. Okay, so we said an example for Israsita Lesata, davening. Absolutely great example. An example for Israsita Le'ela. What would that look like? An awakening from above, a bid for connection from God to us.
No.
Say it again?
Everything?
Okay, yes, God is creating us at every moment. Yeah. So then what would be different than what we would call a specific instance, moment of an awakening from above?
Is there something?
Okay, so that would be one example, which isn't so relevant for us, but yes, that would be one, where God literally goes to somebody and reveals himself in a prophecy. So that's a very interesting one. If you clearly, this is how I understand it, that if you clearly see God's hand in a way that wows you, like, oh my gosh, God is involved here, he's helping me out, then yes.
So there could also be like a daily thing, like, oh, for example, like if you, whatever, like if you, for example, missed the bus, but it eventually helped you out somewhere, like you could say like, oh, that was like.
That is you making an effort to make sense of your life and to make sense of God in your life, right?
No, not in a way like, oh, I understand a little more, like, oh, wow, thank you so much, Hashem, for like doing this.
So in a way that it's like, whoa, Hashem helped me out here. So I think yes, although I would clarify that it's more in a spiritual context. Okay? What do you
Miracle.
think? A miracle. So that's right. A miracle is a Srasat Leila. And so,
And you said learning Torah.
yeah, so learning Torah, we're going to learn about later, is a unique category where it initiates in Srasat Leila. Okay? What do you think? What would be an example of Srasat Leila?
When I visited Jerusalem for the first time last year, I felt all of this energy, and I was like, I know Hashem is here, but you don't feel that all the time.
Mhm.
So I think like that access to that energy and like the thinning of the veil would be an awakening from above, because I didn't do anything for it. I just showed up.
Right. That's an example of Srasat Leila, absolutely. That feeling of like, you're just chilling, you're doing your thing, you haven't maybe done all that work to prepare for that trip, that visit, and then suddenly you're like, whoa, I feel God right now, right? What do you think?
Sometimes I think about
Matan Torah, that we're going to see that as an example inside. Matan Torah was Israsat Leila, with a caveat there. It's an Israsat Leila Matan Torah that was preceded by an Israsat Sata. What was the Israsat Sata, the bid for connection that we made in preparation for Matan Torah?
what is Matan
Following
Torah?
God.
Receiving the Torah on Shavuot at Mount Sinai.
Following God into the desert.
Following God into the desert. And what did we do during that time once we went into the desert?
We worked on ourselves to get rid of the impurities.
Correct. And what do we call that process?
Spheres.
Stirat Omer.
Mm-hmm.
Stirat Omer, the counting of the Omer. Okay? So a
But
pure...
they counted the Omer during
Yes.
that time?
Yes. That's where we get that from. They were so excited. They were told, okay, in 50 days from now, you're getting the Torah. You're getting the Torah. You're going to have this intimate meeting with God where he's going to give you his wisdom. And they were so excited that, and also they were obligated to bring a korban omer. So that's why we call it the counting of the omer.
But they were obligated to do that while they were in the desert?
Yes.
But how did they weren't growing barley in the desert? But I'm confused.
Were they not doing any counting of
I
the
think they brought an
sparrows?
animal.
And where it says it in the text that they
Let me
were
find
counting
it
the
for
Omer?
you. Let me write this down. I want to find it for you. It's from Emor. In Parshas Emor, it talks about the counting of the Omer and the obligation for the. Let me write this down. And I'll find for you. Did they bring the korban Omer in the desert? Omer in desert. Okay, I'm just going to keep this with me, and I'll get back to you today on this. From the way I understand it, they left Egypt. Right away, God told them to bring the korban. It could be that I'm misunderstanding that and that happened later. But definitely the counting happens straight away. The counting that we do is commemorating, so to speak, although is reliving the counting that the Jewish people had. They were so excited for what happens when
It
you're...
said in the text, in 50 days you're going to get the Torah.
So let me open Parshas Emor. Where's the finish?
That's all of them.
Emor is at the end of Vayikra. Vayikra is talking about the sacrifices. Now, does it bring it in that context? Or, okay, what's the Emor? Tisperu chamishim yom. Spartam lechamim acharsa Shabbos. The Nifla, so Amr is talking about the Omer sacrifice. Yadabar, Hashem Omer Shalemar. For 6 days you will work, on the 7th day you will rest. These are all the obligations for Pesach. So it's saying that on the 14th of the month of Nisan, you're going to bring a korban Pesach sacrifice, which they were obligated to do then as well. You could say, like, how did they bring a korban? Right, because Omer is Bali. So, so that's the obligation for Pesach.
Wait, but
And for all one of the days, they're going to bring sacrifices. Then God spoke to him again and said, Kisavol Aretz, when you come to the land. Okay, I think you are correct. That when you come into the land and you reap your harvest, you're going to bring an omer from your first harvest to the kohen.
Kasha Emor is after we had Agon, after we had first.
Correct, but it's not necessarily in that order, because Vayikra, it's not necessarily, Torah isn't giving a historical account necessarily, because we're going back to Pesach here. So you're right. The korban omer was brought once they entered into Israel, the day after Pesach. Shabbos, and it's a big question. Why does it say from the day after Shabbos you will bring the omer offering and not from the day after Pesach, which is what it meant? And there's a whole branch of Judaism that takes what the Torah says literally, familiar with this, and they would bring the omer offering the day after Shabbat Bereshit, which is like the main Shabbos, the first Shabbos after Simchat Torah. That's when they would bring it. It was a whole argument. Chassidus addresses this, and before Shavuot, after this, we're going to talk about that. Why does it command us to do this the day after Pesach? So you're right. Once we get into the land of Israel and we have the harvest, we have the korban omer. The counting of the omer is also in here. You shall count for yourselves from the day that you bring the omer, 7 full weeks, 50 days. You will bring a korban mincha.
What does omer actually mean?
Omer is a measurement. Omer is a biblical measurement, which was the amount of barley that they needed to bring. It's about this much from what I remember, something like this, like a box size. That was the amount of barley, and so that just became the name of the korban. And then because we start counting right after the korban 50 days towards Shavuot, we call the counting of the omer, even though because we count from the time we bring the omer sacrifice. Now. Very interesting question.
Is it a measurement of something other than barley, or does it specifically say
barley? No, it specifically says to bring barley, which is
had just entered the desert.
So that's the thing that Sophie was right, that we started bringing the sacrifice from when we entered into the land of Israel, the omer sacrifice. The counting of the omer, we definitely started straight away, and that's the source for it. The question is, do we have a biblical source for that? And I don't know. I have to check. The biblical source is here in context of in connection with the sacrifice that we bring. And it's an interesting question of, before they went into the land of Israel, after that first year when they actually got the Torah, there were 39 more years, right? Were they counting the omer every year? I never thought of that, but that's a fair question, right? Before they actually, was this, it's tied very closely. The counting of the omer is tied very closely to the bringing of the omer, and the way that Chassidus makes the connection is that all of the other sacrifices that we would bring in the temple that were of grain were wheat. We would bring wheat, and specifically would actually bring matzahs, except on Shavuot. They kept the temple Pesach clean. It was very smart. They didn't bring chametz except on Shavuot. Everything else, all the wheat offering they brought were matzahs, were unleavened, except for 2 sacrifices. The omer, which was barley, the omer sacrifice, and one other one. You guys know which one it was? Which other one sacrifice was barley? The korban sota. You guys heard about the sota? Sota is usually termed the wayward wife. That's how they call it, although I don't really like that translation. In a situation where it talks about this in the Torah, where a husband suspects his wife of being unfaithful, clearly tells her, I don't trust you around this man. You cannot be what we call yichud, right? You're talking about yichud. You cannot be alone with this man. And then 2 witnesses see that she has been alone with this man, but they don't know what she did. But there's a what's called a chashash, a fear. The woman is taken to the temple, and she needs to bring a korban sota, which is with barley. Barley was seen as animal food, versus wheat was seen as human being food. And the idea was that she was suspected of behaving animalistically, and therefore bring an animal sacrifice, an animal food sacrifice. And so too with the omer, we brought an animal food sacrifice because it's connected with the counting of the days, where we're refining our animal soul. So that's why they're connected there.
Why does that make it not? Why is barley chametzish?
Not connected to chametz. Any of the 7 grains that are leavened, so that rise, become chametz. Chametz is referring to leavened bread, not necessarily from one grain over another, which is why you can have matzah, by the way. Oat matzah. You can have barley matzah. I don't know if anyone wants that, but
I had oat matzah.
You had oat matzah? So there you go. So it's chametz versus not chametz is not talking about a certain grain. Although the context of whether sacrifice or grain is wheat or barley. Chassidic and Kabbalah says that there are differences. So when we're bringing a barley offering, there's a significance there. Not chametz, but rather the fact that it's animal food. On Shavuot, we bring a wheat offering from the new harvest that is leavened. We bring chametz, and there is a significance there as well that Chassidus talks about. So only how we bring leavened bread versus all the other times where it was unleavened.
So you said there are 2 times that we bring leavened offerings.
There's one time where we bring a leavened wheat offering,
and
Shavuot.
2 times that we bring
2 times that we bring a barley offering. Every other time was unleavened wheat. Okay, and those times are the sota, which then she's made to drink these waters where they erase the name of Hashem into the water, and she drinks it. If she was innocent, she gets blessed with sons. Because it's a real ordeal to put your wife through. And I don't know how you go back to your husband after that one, but anyway, you go back to your husband and get brachas for shalom bayis and all of that. And if she was unfaithful, she blows up and dies, and the guy she was with also dies wherever he is.
She explodes?
Yes, pretty much.
What did they make her drink?
Something that had the name of Hashem, like water with the name of Hashem. Like
they would write the name of Hashem on a piece of paper and dissolve it into water, which would drink it. Yeah, that's the sota.
Did it really happen like that? Woman had to drink that?
So there are opinions that this never happened.
Right.
There are actually opinions, and then there are opinions that it did. It'd have to be really dafka because you're told not to, and then you're found enclosed, and there have to have been kosher witnesses. It was very hard.
Mm-hmm.
It was very hard to get into that situation. There are opinions that it never actually happened because it would make it so difficult. Like the witnesses had to be so perfect, and she had to be warned, and she had to be this, and it's an interesting one. And the thing that they both have in common is this idea of animal that we're so. I'm going to check for you. Do we have a biblical source for the fact that they counted before getting is it in the Torah? Before getting the Torah. And then what happened in between? Oh my gosh, that's also really interesting. The 39 years between, did they count? Yeah, thanks. For the 39 years between getting the Torah and actually going into the land of Israel and bringing that sacrifice after they had the harvest in the land of Israel, did they count the Omer?
Did they know of the Spheros at the time? They must have gotten that from Hashem too.
So they're known as the Dor Hadea, the generation of Dea means knowledge, the generation that left Egypt that was ruled by Moshe. So they knew stuff. They knew a lot more than we know. Whatever we know, they knew. Yes. So there's the actual counting, which is the idea of that we're preparing, right? When you prepare for something, you're excited for something, you count the days, you make a countdown, right? And then there's the spiritual significance of that, and which
we're counting up, not counting
right,
down.
We're counting up, not counting down, which is to say that each one of those days we want it to be a full day, a day that we've changed ourselves, a day that we made an effort. So did they count 39? Okay.
You said we were going to read inside today.
Yes. Okay, so we're going to see that there's two formulas. One is Esrosita La'ela. So Esrosita La'ela would be Shavuot. Shavuot, though, was preceded by an Esrosita Sata. What would be an example of God revealing himself to us without us having done our effort beforehand in the biblical story?
Wait, I thought you just said Shavuot.
Pesach. Shavuot was God revealing himself, giving us the Torah, which we didn't deserve, but we had worked towards by counting the Omer, by refining ourselves.
So is it Esrosita La'ela?
It's an Esrosita La'ela that comes after an Esrosita Sata.
Okay.
The order is going to be important. But yes, it's an Esrosita La'ela. A pure Esrosita La'ela would be Pesach, where we were on the 49th level of impurity. We did not deserve to be redeemed, and it's brought very clearly that God said, I keep my promises. I promised Abraham I'd take you out, so I'm taking you out, your full father. Pesach in the name itself represents Esrosita La'ela. Pesach means to pass over. It's the idea that God, and to skip, that God took us and he schlepped us up to a much higher level of spirituality, schlepped us out of Egypt, literally, physically, and spiritually raised us up to a much higher spiritual level in a way that we did not deserve. And we see that. You said miracles, right? So through all of the miracles that happened when we left Egypt, that would be like Esrosita La'ela. So in our own life, right, we don't see miracles like leaving Egypt, but, right, as Nechama was saying, that when you come to, she came to Jerusalem and just felt something, right? And feel this, let's say, on Yom Kippur. I don't know, has anyone been in shul when at the end of Yom Kippur, and they're all saying together, like Shema Yisrael, right? You feel something? That's called an Isra Delayla. Now, you also worked, that may be an Isra Delayla that you could work in. Enol is the work that you do beforehand. Sitting in shul and fasting is the work that you do. But that feeling of like, oh my gosh, God is real. Whoa, like this is something, or that emotion that we feel, that's called an Isra Delayla. Okay? That's where God speaks to us. Okay? Not in a prophecy, because we don't get prophecy today, but in some sort of way where we feel much more connected. We feel raised up. And some people have this, right? As you said, the first time they came to Jerusalem, some people just have this. The altar was going to say, some people just have this in their day-to-day life. They're praying, they pray every day. And one day they just pray better. They just feel excited about God today. It's like, why? I don't know. Something happened today. That's God saying, I want a relationship with you. I'm making a bid for connection to you. That's an Isra Leila. Isra Sata, we have examples of it all the time. When we don't feel inspired, we haven't felt that God's speaking to us, and we do the work anyway. We put the effort in. That's the Isra Sata. Okay? So now let's read this up. Behine, page 10 at the top. Al yadei ha'alas mayim nukvin. Through raising up the feminine waters. Okay? There's feminine and masculine waters that talks about in Kabbalah. I like to think of it as rain. The process of rain is that rain comes from, not only I like to think of it, it's brought in Chassidus. The clouds, from the clouds comes down rain. That's Isra Leila, right? And it's a real Isra Leila. It comes to the whole world, which the Gemara talks about, that the fact that rain is a blessing from God, but that reaches the whole world is the highest level of blessing, higher even than the splitting of the sea every time it rains. Anyway, so anytime I complain about rain, my husband tells me this Gemara, and so Isra Leila is the rain. What happens then to the rain? It pools on the ground, and then what happens to it? Where does it go? We drink it, or
To the sea.
to the sea, and then what happens?
Or it gets absorbed into.
It evaporates up again, right? Now, I don't know, you probably learned this in school better than me, but evaporation, it goes back up, and then that's what's called ha'alas mayim nukvin. The raising up of the feminine waters is the rain that we received then gets brought back up. Okay? Like Malchus is feminine, it receives the sephirot from above, the masculine sephirot, and then passes them on. Anyway, so mayim nukvin, feminine waters, that's the idea you could think of as evaporation. The water from below going back up. So through raising up the feminine waters, the masculine waters is referring to like the rain coming down. The Isra Sata, and what we call Isra Sata, an arousal, an awakening from below. Through us making our effort down here, Nimshach, we then draw down Isra Leila. An awakening, an arousal, a bid for connection from above. That feeling of inspiration and of excitement in our Judaism and in our connection with God. This is the idea that it's brought about when it speaks about the sacrifices. Because again, the sacrifice, classic, it's Isra Sata. I'm coming with my animal and I'm making an effort, I'm making a bid for connection to God. Korban means the sacrifice, and korban comes from the word karov, close. It means that I'm showing up, I want to get close to God. What does it say about these sacrifices? Reach nichoach lahavaya. That is a pleasing aroma, a pleasing smell to Hashem. That this is something that pleases God. When we do our effort down here and make that good for connection to come close. This process, where we start off with an arousal and awakening, a bid for connection from below, and then as a result of that, we draw down God's inspiration, and we saw this again in the sacrifices. What happened after we brought our sacrifice to the temple, put it on the altar, and lit a small fire? What happened after that? A big fire descended from heaven. Eish milamayla. That's what we would call the Isra Leila. So this is one system. I make my effort. I show up. I reach out for a connection to God, and God responds as a result of that by giving me inspiration, by making me feel more close than I could have just on my own. That's one system. Yeah.
So wait, you were saying that the rain is when we are like given the divine inspiration from above, and the evaporation is when we do the effort.
Yes.
From below.
Yes, and that's what if you want to get into the Kabbalistic terms, that would be the feminine versus the masculine waters. Masculine water is what we call rain. Feminine water is what we call evaporation. Okay, and this has nothing in this specific context to do with men and women specifically. Okay.
Well,
Yes, you can, yes, because women are the receivers,
Yeah.
right? So we receive what's been given to us and then create something brand new, right? As opposed to men who are the givers. Although I got in big trouble when I taught this to a birthright group the other week. So yeah, I changed my
they
class.
didn't appreciate it.
They're from a much more, I guess, liberal college in Canada, and men and women roles. And I realized, okay, we'll do a different topic for that. But I think this is more of a safe space, so we can talk about the feminine masculine roles. Definitely in the context specifically of the feminine and masculine waters, it's talking about two different processes of how we relate to God. So both are relevant for men and women. Both men and women can do Isra Siddha Sata and can receive Isra Siddha Leila. So that's important. So this is system number one. I show up to God not because I feel like it, not because I'm inspired, but because I want to connect. I'm doing my effort. I'm praying, not necessarily because I feel so inspired, but because I care about the relationship to some extent. What happens then? God gifts me an inspiration from above. That's system number one. We got that one? Basically, who's initiating here, right? Who's initiating in system number one? The Jewish people, us. We are initiating and God is responding. However, sometimes it starts off with inspiration from above, with a bid for connection that was initiated by God. Hanimshach, which is then drawn down and revealed, la'orer, to awaken within us, our own efforts. Sometimes God is tired of waiting for us to make that bit of connection, and he says, I want to connect to you right now. I'm going to make you feel inspired and excited so that you can then put in your effort. So sometimes the order is switched. It starts off with the inspiration, and then we put in our work. And maybe, I don't know, Nechama, if you saw this, but you came to Israel, you got excited, and then you're like, okay, I want to learn. I want to take this on. I want to make this real, right? That would be the other order. Dahainu, what does this mean? La'orer asa adam. Sometimes God wants to wake up a person, to awaken him. Lahakitzai, which means to wake him up, mishinasai, from his sleep. Behevle ha'olam, in the vanities of the world. He wants to shake up the person and say, hey, I'm here, I'm real, I want you to connect with me. Just as we see at the beginning of the creation of the world, everything came for free. When God created the world, did the world deserve to be created? Had the world done anything to earn this? No, it hadn't existed, right? So when God created Adam, he did everything for him for free. That's the whole world started off from this bid for connection from above. God saying, I want to connect with this world. Therefore, I will create this world, even though it hasn't earned or deserved me doing this. But then what happens? What happened right after Adam was created for free?
He sinned.
Before that.
He names on like
before that.
He creates Chava.
Before that. It says in the Torah, Vayenichehu b'gan Eden. God placed him in the Garden of Eden.
to work.
La'avda o l'shamra. To work and to guard it. To do the Isra Siddha Sata, to do his work. So first God created Adam meaning Adam and Eve, right? They were one. And that was for free. They hadn't earned it. They hadn't deserved their life and their existence. And then what did God do? Placed them in the garden and said, now you got to do your work. That's the classic example of something starting off with the Isra Siddha Leila, a bid for connection from God, and then the reciprocation of the bid for connection from man, from us down here. Okay? As it says, Ki chafetz chesed hu, because God desires kindness. God is inherently kind, and that's why he, in his kindness, created the whole world, even though it was undeserving. And then in the hope that then we will reach out back to God and we'll have a relationship with him. Just a side point that I recently learned, that because the world at the beginning was the first stage of the world, and first 1,000 years, if you were here when we talked about the different millennia, was a time of chesed, of kindness. That's why brothers and sisters were actually able to marry each other then and have children, because there was just so much kindness. Right? We know that Adam's children obviously married each other, because otherwise we wouldn't be here, right? So that's just interesting. The world was infused with this kindness at that time. But then God wanted us to reciprocate. And after this, what we call chesed chinam, free gifts, God, let's say, schlepping us out of Egypt even though we didn't deserve it, God giving us an inspiration even though we hadn't worked for it, then God places it on the actions of the lower worlds of us. God says, okay, now it's on you. As it's written, God then placed Adam into the garden to work it and to guard it. We get these two systems, two orders of our relationship with God. Sometimes we make the bid for connection, and then God responds. Sometimes God makes the bid for connection, and then we respond. Now the author was going to say, however, we need to make sure that when we get inspired by God, we actually respond. We don't just like, oh, this is so beautiful, and expect it to last forever. Yes?
Is an example of
very interesting. Into the water before God split the sea. Very interesting. Yeah, God was waiting for something from us, from some sort of effort and representation of emunah and belief. And then God split the sea. I never thought of it in that context there, but that's very much so. Very interesting. Okay, so now the author was going to say that we all would love, for the process to start out by God inspiring us, by God giving us that inspiration for free. And we wake up in the morning, we're just like, oh my gosh, I'm so excited to serve God today. Like, this is real. I feel something. I feel my soul. That's what we're all waiting for. And then, from there, I'll start doing my work. The author was going to say that there's actually a downside to the Esther Shemtov, and that there's a pitfall that many people fall into, which is that they expect this Esther Shemtov to last forever, but it's temporary. It comes and it goes. That's the nature of a spiritual awakening from above. It's temporary. Even though in the moment it might feel like this is how I'm going to feel forever, it's not. It's just how you feel right now. And therefore our job is immediately, when experiencing that inspiration, to do something with it, to respond with some effort from us, even though it's the hardest thing to do in the moment, because when you're so inspired in that moment, the last thing you want to do is start taking a look at your limited self and all your flaws and all your problems and start to slowly chip away at them. That's the last thing you want to do. You're feeling so inspired and in the clouds and, this is my new life and this is my new reality. And God says, no, that's a very big mistake. If you just ride the wave, it's going to come crashing down and you're going to come crashing down with it. Our job is in that moment of the inspiration to take a look at ourselves. And not at our godly selves, at our animal selves, and say, hey, you're still here. Even though right now you're quiet, you're subdued because of the Isra Stilayla. Right now you're not speaking because we're so inspired. You're still there. How can we bring you into the picture here? How can we actually acknowledge your existence and work to change you so you can also get on board with this inspiration? Okay? Aval, however, mikol makom, nevertheless, even if this is how the process started, with God inspiring him, there still needs to be the person's own work, even if he feels so inspired and in the clouds from God. But nonetheless, nimshach isrusa dileila laorer isrusa dilasata. The only reason for why God makes bids of connection to us and inspires us, even though we don't deserve it, is so that we can then do our own work and respond. Not respond based on this Eila, but respond based on us. Bring our whole self, sacrifice our whole selves, and give that over to God. And now the author was going to say, we can see this in the examples that we've been bringing until now, in people's day-to-day service, that there are some people who the process starts off, and it's not some people. There are some stages of people's lives and times where God initiates the process. There are some stages and times of people's life where we need to initiate because we're not feeling any inspiration. We've got to just show up. And the author was going to say, I've seen people like this who come to me and they say, suddenly I just started to pray like nobody's business. Like I started to really feel this. I started to get excited about God. And this lasted a few weeks because these were the ultra Chassidim, not us. So usually these things last a few minutes. It lasted a few weeks. I was on this high and then it just went away. So I was going to say, we see this in the day-to-day life of people. How do I respond? How do I respond to these people when they come to me? So the Yuvan said we can understand this idea that when God inspires us, we have to respond be'avodas Hashem, in the service of God. There are two levels in serving God, what we just spoke about, these two systems. Ha'echad, first, Bechinas Isrusa de Sata, where we start off with our bit of connection from below, the awakening from below, page 13. The Yagias Nefesh, with the hard work of the soul, the Yagias Basar, and the hard work of the flesh, the Hamakas Hadas, through the depth of knowledge of the Beispainanus and meditation, the Lev Nishbar, and a broken heart. The Altar was bringing 5 different ways where we initiate the service of God from our own end. Yagias Nefesh, the hard work of the soul, the hard work of the flesh. Contemplate Hamakas Hadas, deeply thinking about God, or Beispainanus, and contemplation. What the difference between Hamakas Hadas and Beispainanus is, I do not know. The Lev Nishbar, and a broken heart, serving God with a broken heart. So when the first step number 1, we start off with our work, that then through this process, Yavo Banafsha will come to his soul, Giloi, a revelation, or Kirvas Elakim, of the light of God's closeness. That's number 1. This means, what we just said. We start off with an Israsa Sata, a bit for connection from below, and God then responds. And we're promised, by the way, that God will respond, even though it feels like maybe sometimes we're stuck in the Israsa Sata for a very long time, and we're making the bid for connection. We don't feel. Eventually we will feel. Umadrega Habez, then there's the second level. Hainu Shelafamim, sometimes, Yuchalias, it happens, it's possible, that a person will feel his spalos banefesh, in excitement and awakening of his soul. Sheloi al yadei hachana v'yagia klal, that did not come through any preparation or hard work at all. As we see, right, and we have an example from the Chama here, and it could be that we've all experienced this at different times. As we see clearly, sheyesh harbe anashim, there are many people, shemit orim pitom, that suddenly wake up, they get inspired, they get excited. Yitlahev libam, their hearts get excited. Umaycham, and their minds get excited. But tefillah, during prayer, or during the rest of their day, meshech zman ma, for some period of time. Bli noda lahem asiba, without it being clear to them what the reason is. Ma'ayin ba lehem hisaros, where did this inspiration come from? However, there's a catch. Ubima'at zman, but sometime later, yichle koach et aratzot, the power of this inspiration goes away, dies down. Why is this? This is because that this was always just an initiation from God. This is not something that you created for yourself. This is something that God placed into you. Rak is La'ela, and the only reason that God did this, that God awakened you, was La'ira, it was in order to awaken and initiate Israsa de Sata. You then putting in your limited effort down here, you bringing your animal soul on board, you bringing your whole person on board to this experience to say, what am I now going to give back to God?
Sorry. Can you go through the 5 ways that we do Israsa de Sata?
Sure. So the Hamakas Hadas versus Beispainanus, I'm not sure I know so much. Yagias Nefesh is to, it says here mentally, is to exert yourself in the service of God, not necessarily by exerting your physical body, but your mind, your emotions, the kind of deeper work where you take a look at yourself and you put in the hard work to change the inner workings of yourself, your soul. Yagias Basar is the flesh. Now, that doesn't mean necessarily punishing your flesh, but we have fleshly desires and instincts, and to do the hard work to rein that in. The Rebbe Rashab, I brought this story to you before. The Rebbe Rashab once told the Brisker Rav that he had trained his physical body to automatically do mitzvahs. Like that was the instinct. Our instinct is like, it's a fast day, I want to drink, but I'm not going to drink. the Rebbe Rashab had trained himself through Yegias Basar, through literally changing, like through the hard work of the flesh, that it was a fast day, so he didn't want to drink. Like, anyway, so that's like high goal. But the hard work of the soul, the hard work of the flesh. Ha'amakas hadas, emek means depth, and das means knowledge. Remember, we spoke about das. This is the idea of integration, of taking what you've learned and making it practical and real and relevant for yourself. So to go into the depth of that process, of taking what you've learned about God and making that real for you. Hitbonanut means meditation. So meditating on God, deep contemplation of God. And Leiv Nishbar means coming to God with a broken heart. And this Chassidus talks about actually in the Maimar of Ani Ladodi, which speaks about the time of Elul before the high holidays, how that's the opposite process as we're going to see. We start off with Isras de Lasata, and then God responds with Isras de Leila. Leiv Nishbar is the idea that nothing's working. I'm doing all these things, and I feel far from God, and my soul still feels trapped. And as a result of that, I feel bad. I have mercy. The Tanya of today. Tanya of today talks about having rachamin, having mercy on your soul. And it compares it to, it talks about the midah of Tiferes. Tiferes is mercy, where you experience what your soul is experiencing. You put yourself in the shoes of your soul. Now, sometimes Tiferes means joy, because you're like, yay, my soul's doing great, so I'm joyful. Very often it means mercy. I feel bad, like my soul just wants to express itself and look at the life it's living. So Leiv Nishbar is the idea of feeling compassion for your soul. So those are the five that the Alter Rebbe brings. Okay, so the Alter Rebbe now is going to tell us what's the difference. What's the difference when we initiate versus when God initiates? Okay, so we'll continue with that, please God, tomorrow. For now, do we understand the two processes? And this is not saying there's some people who serve God this way, some people this way. It's sometimes it's this way and sometimes it's this way. Yeah.
The brokenheartedness that he's describing here, is that because it's not that Hashem is so far away, right? Hashem is constantly all around us, but is it the realization of like where you are compared to your like potential?
So yes, and I think it's also where your soul is right now. So your soul has one mission and purpose in this world, which is to feel close to God, to connect with God, to be reunified with God. It was one with God, it was yanked away, put into this body, put into this world, and it just wants to go back. It just wants to experience that union again. And that's on a constant basis. It's calling out to us, saying, do this, that's going to connect you to God. Connect me to God in all the different ways and opportunities we have. And so when we contemplate on the fact, on what that process looks like. So my soul is calling for me to do this, and look what I'm doing instead. My soul wants me to think these thoughts, and look what I'm thinking instead. That arouses this idea of compassion in the soul, the idea of the brokenheartedness. And it says that God always answers a broken heart. So when we get to that place of really feeling what our soul feels, God will then, that's the Isra de Lasata, that's our effort. That then God will respond by saying, okay, I'm going to help you with this. I'm going to help you feel your soul more. I'm going to help your soul be expressed more.
So that's the goal of davening, is to get to that point of brokenheartedness.
I don't know. That's the point of davening.
Well, it says because the person's hard work in prayer by exerting himself mentally and physically to think deeply in contemplation of Hashem's true existence, and through this coming to have a broken heart. So if you're when you're davening, you're talking about Hashem and what Hashem has done for us and the greatness of Hashem, and so is that.
Then you realize how far away you are. So there is places in Chassidus that talk about the whole beginning part of davening, where we talk about the hodon, all the praises of God, is to actually have us feel far away from Him, have us, and all the meditations that we think of that the Alter brings of how there's so many layers between us and between God, and there's these mazalos and there's all these things that we talk about, and that's supposed to have us feel far, and then so I guess that then leads us to this feeling of having a broken heart, that I'm so far from God and I just want to get close. So if you look at the verse that we were looking at yesterday, the paragraph right before the Shema, it talks about God have mercy on my soul. It talks about, which sounds funny when you say it in English, but here, you see right here, I think this idea of broken heart can also be expressed here in davening, right before the Shema. Here, the Ahavat Olam. We say, Chemla Gadola, God have great mercy on me. The Yisera Chemla Kamat Aleinu. For your name, we are praying to you. Avinu Rahman, the merciful God, have mercy on us and put in our hearts the ability to think and to think about you, to hear you, and to. So there we're actually, we can see the Lev Nishbar very much in this process here. So yeah, I guess the answer is yes, that during davening, all the different meditations and Israel the stuff that the Alter Rebbe talks about throughout Chassidus is happening in some points during davening. That's the goal, and then playing out throughout the rest of our day as a result of that. There's a word that I'm still looking for. That davening is that nuclear, representation of the rest of our day's service of God. So micro. That's the word. That's what I was looking for. Thank you. It's a micro, mini micro kind of, but it's not one piece of it. It incorporates all of it, but in smaller, in a condensed time during our day, and then that plays out for the rest of our day. So yeah. Okay, so we're going to continue with the pitfalls of the second experience that the Alter Rebbe brought, which is where God initiates first. And the reason for why people were coming to them complaining and saying, I felt so inspired, excited about God, and then it just went away. And the Alter Rebbe says it goes away as if it was never there in the first place, which is the crazy part. Like, hey, it went away, but I feel a little bit more excited about that. No. It was here, I was on a high, and then it went away, and I'm crashed back down to exactly where I was before. So that's what we're going to address tomorrow. Please God. Okay? So we did some good reading today?
Thank you.
Good. We're going to try and make our way through this. We're going to do it. Amazing. Have a great day, and I'm going to check this out.